All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're stepping into the fascinating and sometimes completely misunderstood world of budgetary control. It's a space where surface-level numbers often hide the true story, and where reading a financial statement is less about basic math and much more about being a financial detective. We're going to look at the essential stage of budgetary control, specifically focusing on how we identify and analyze the deviations between what we plan to happen and what actually happened. Let's kick things off by challenging a pretty common assumption. If I tell you a department came in way under budget, your very first instinct is probably to celebrate, right? I mean, saving money sounds awesome. But, well, actually, scratch that. We're going to look at why that assumption is fundamentally flawed and why coming in under budget might literally be a complete disaster for your overall strategy. Traditionally, budget deviations or variances are treated as a super basic binary. A favorable deviation means you brought in higher revenue than expected or your costs were lower. An unfavorable deviation? Exact opposite, lower income or higher costs. This classification is based entirely on the immediate surface-level impact on the income statement. But here's the kicker. This simplistic green is good, red is bad view gives us almost zero actual actionable information about how our business strategy is really playing out. Because, let's be real, surface-level data lies constantly. For instance, imagine seeing a massive drop in research and development expenses. You save the money, so favorable, right? Well, not exactly. Cutting discretionary expenses like R&D risks starving your own future and putting the company at severe risk. On the flip side, what about a huge spike in production costs? Looks highly unfavorable, but what if your new product is just a massive hit and you're cranking out way more units just to meet booming sales demand? That is an unfavorable variance you absolutely want to have. So, how do we peel back the layers of these financial clues and isolate the variables? To find the real truth, we have to move way beyond the surface and use our forensic tools to tear these budget variances apart. The most effective way to reconcile our budgets with reality is a variable-by-variable analysis. It's like a giant puzzle where we isolate the data by changing just one piece at a time. Typically, we start with our budgeted baseline. Then we swap in the actual volume while keeping everything else perfectly constant. And finally, we swap in the actual price. By moving step by step like this, we isolate exactly what caused the financial shift. Just look at how beautifully this works for sales. By taking our purely budgeted baseline, then introducing actual volume, and finally layering in actual price, we cleanly separate the driving factors. We isolate the volume effect, so how much the change in quantity sold impacted us, from the price effect, how much our pricing changes impacted us. It's just a remarkably clean separation. And we apply this exact same step-by-step logic to production costs, but with a sharper focus on what physically goes into making the product. We look at the sheer volume of production, the actual quantity of inputs consumed per unit, and the price paid for those raw materials. By stepping through these elements and changing one variable at a time, we pinpoint exactly where the spending went off script from our master plan. Now, isolating these variables naturally leads us to the next big step, identifying the suspects in our financial mystery and assigning departmental accountability. It's time to connect these numerical clues to the actual human decision makers in our organization. Think about your own organization for a second. Suddenly, accountability becomes crystal clear and, more importantly, totally data-driven. If the isolated variance shows we paid a higher price for raw materials, boom, we know exactly who to talk to. The purchasing manager. If the variance shows we're using way too much material per unit produced, well, that falls squarely on the production manager's desk. But wait, here's a massive plot twist in our investigation. What about a deviation driven purely by a higher volume of production? Your gut instinct might be to march down and blame the production manager for the spike in total cost. But higher production volume isn't some inefficiency on the factory floor. It's actually driven by the sales department generating higher demand. The production manager is literally just fulfilling the orders the commercial team brought in. So to accurately assign this accountability and, not unfairly punish the production team, we switch our lens. We use something called marginal contribution, which is simply the sales price minus the variable costs. This means we evaluate the sales team not just on the gross revenue they bring in, but on the true margin of the volume they demanded the factory actually produce. By refining our equations with this marginal contribution, we can fairly split up the commercial accountability. The sales manager takes full ownership of the volume effect, the actual quantity of goods sold. Meanwhile, the marketing manager takes responsibility for the commercial price effect, meaning the actual price point the market accepted based on their specific positioning and promotions. Putting it all together, this framework successfully separates the competitive variances on top, which are driven by sales and marketing, from the productive variances on the bottom, driven by production efficiency and purchasing. We've essentially mapped accountability across the entire business cycle. Now, if the benefit outweighs the cost of doing the analysis, we can dig even deeper here. We can ask, was our success due to our brilliant internal strategy, or did we just catch a lucky break? For example, we could separate our price effect by comparing our prices directly to a market leader. We could look at our sales volume against general economic growth, or, say, in agriculture, comparing our crop yields against the regional average. Basically, we want to know, are we actually outperforming the market or just riding a rising tide? Which brings us to the flexible budget solution, where we figure out how to balance accountability with reality. How do we handle deviations caused by massive exchange rate swings or economic downturns that absolutely no one in the company actually controls? This is where we introduce the flexible budget. It is an absolute game changer for separating uncontrollable external influences from your actual internal performance. Think of it as a budget that adapts to reality. We take our original plan, but we update the macroeconomic factors that we have zero control over. The practical application here is incredibly effective. First, you build this new flexible budget using the actual external data. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, no one gets blamed for the gap between the original budget and this new flexible budget. That difference, that's just the reality of the market. But third, managers are strictly held accountable for the differences between that flexible budget and their actual performance. What we're really trying to find here is the Goldilocks zone of accountability. It's a delicate balance. If you only measure uncontrollable variables, you have zero accountability and literally no one is driving the ship. But on the flip side, if you blindly blame managers for massive macroeconomic shifts, you just create a toxic culture. You generate destructive stress, people start padding their budgets with massive safety cushions, and your entire organizational planning gets totally distorted. This idea really hits the nail on the head. Finding this just right midpoint between organizational stress and meaningful management oversight isn't just a mathematical equation. It is an absolute art form for leadership. It requires combining the external context of the world with the specific internal management style of your organization. So I'll leave you with this final thought to consider about how you analyze the financial clues in your own organization. If your budget only measures what you can't control, who is actually driving your business? Think about how you isolate variables, assign fair accountability, and adapt to reality. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep digging into those numbers.